She's a total loser. The chant echoed through my childhood home as 23 family members pointed at me like I was some circus freak. Loser. 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 My own blood relatives were treating me worse than strangers on the street. But what they didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, 9 Supreme Court justices would be waiting for me to take my oath as the youngest person ever appointed to the highest court in America. My name is Isabella Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my family's cruelest moment became their most humiliating defeat. It was Thanksgiving 2023, and I had made the mistake of coming home to Philadelphia for what I thought would be a peaceful family gathering. Instead, I walked into an ambush that would change everything forever. The assault began the moment I stepped through the front door of my childhood home. My sister Carmen was the first to attack. "Look who finally decided to show up," she sneered, her voice dripping with disgust. The family disappointment graces us with her presence. The living room fell silent as every eye turned toward me. 23 adults and teenagers, all staring at me like I had committed some unforgivable crime. My mother, Maria Rodriguez, didn't even look up from the turkey she was carving. "Isabella's here," she announced to the room with the same enthusiasm someone might reserve for announcing a root canal appointment. "Our 34-year-old daughter, who still can't figure out her life." The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had learned long ago that showing weakness to my family was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Uncle Roberto, my father's brother who had always been the self-appointed family patriarch, stood up from his chair with a beer in his hand. "You know what, everyone," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. Isabella here is 34 years old, unmarried, no kids, no stable career that any of us can understand, and she keeps making these mysterious trips to Washington, D.C. for what? Some government job that probably pays minimum wage." The room erupted in agreement. My cousin Miguel chimed in, "Yeah, and she never talks about what she actually does. It's probably because she's embarrassed about being a total failure." My Aunt Sophia nodded vigorously. "When I was her age, I had 3 children and owned 2 businesses. What does Isabella have to show for her life? Nothing." That's when my teenage nephew Carlos, who had always been the cruelest member of our family, started the chant that would haunt me for the next hour. "She's a total loser," he shouted, pumping his fist in the air. "Come on, everybody. She's a total loser." One by one, my family members joined in. First Carmen, then Uncle Roberto, then my own mother. Soon, 23 voices were chanting in unison, "Loser. Loser. Loser." I stood there in the doorway, still holding my purse and the pumpkin pie I had brought as a peace offering, while my entire family treated me like I was the subject of some twisted football cheer. The chanting went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. When it finally stopped, the silence was somehow even worse than the noise had been. My father, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "Isabella, your mother and I have been talking. We think it's time for some tough love. You're 34 years old, and you're still acting like a college student who doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. You disappear for weeks at a time, you never tell us anything about your work, and frankly, we're embarrassed to tell our friends about you." The words stung more than anything else they had said so far. These people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were telling me I was an embarrassment to them. I felt tears threatening to form in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't show weakness. Not now. Not when I was so close to proving them all wrong. Carmen wasn't finished with her attack. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, standing up and walking toward me like a predator stalking prey. "Isabella thinks she's better than all of us. She walks around with this mysterious attitude like she's got some big secret." Well, news flash, sister. We all know you're probably working as a secretary or a paralegal or something equally pathetic. Stop pretending you're special. The assumption about my career was so wildly wrong that I almost laughed out loud. If only they knew that for the past 12 years, I had been working as a federal appeals court judge. If only they knew that last month, President Biden had nominated me to fill the Supreme Court vacancy left by Justice Breyer's retirement. If only they knew that in less than an hour, I would be taking my oath as the youngest Supreme Court justice in American history. But I couldn't tell them any of that. Not yet. The confirmation had been kept under strict confidentiality until the official ceremony, which was scheduled to begin at 4:30 p.m. today. I glanced at my watch. 3:43 p.m. In 47 minutes, everything would change. But right now, I had to endure this humiliation for just a little bit longer. Uncle Roberto was just getting warmed up. You want to know what I think, Isabella? I think you're running some kind of scam. All these trips to Washington, all this secrecy about your job. I bet you're not even employed. I bet you're living off credit cards and lying to everyone about having a career. That's why you never talk about it. That's why you can't afford to get married or have kids like a normal person. The accusations were getting more ridiculous by the minute, but my family was eating it up. They nodded along with Uncle Roberto's conspiracy theories like he was delivering the gospel truth. My cousin Maria jumped in with her own theory. I bet she's involved in some kind of pyramid scheme or multi-level marketing thing. That would explain all the traveling and the secrecy. My mother finally put down her carving knife and turned to face me directly. Isabella, we love you, but we're tired of your games. Either tell us what you really do for work, or stop coming to family gatherings and pretending everything is fine. We can't keep enabling your delusions of grandeur. The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My own mother was threatening to disown me if I didn't reveal confidential information about my government position. That's when my phone started buzzing in my purse. I knew exactly who it was without looking. Justice Roberts' clerk had told me they would call at 3:45 p.m. to confirm my arrival time for the ceremony. I glanced at the screen. U.S. Supreme Court was displayed across the top. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The room fell silent as I answered the phone. "This is Isabella Rodriguez," I said, using my most professional voice. The entire room was straining to hear the other side of the conversation, but I kept my responses deliberately vague. "Yes, I understand. 4:30 sharp. Yes, Chief Justice Roberts is expecting me. No, I haven't been delayed. I'll be there with time to spare." When I hung up, 23 pairs of eyes were staring at me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Carlos, the teenager who had started the chanting, was the first to speak. "Who was that supposed to be?" "Your imaginary boss." The room erupted in laughter, but I could tell they were all dying to know who had actually called me. I checked my watch again. 3:47 p.m. 43 minutes until my swearing-in ceremony. 43 minutes until I would officially become Justice Isabella Rodriguez of the United States Supreme Court. 43 minutes until my family's cruel words would come back to haunt them in the most spectacular way possible. "You know what?" I said, finally finding my voice after an hour of abuse. "You're all right about one thing. I do have secrets. I've been keeping something from this family for 12 years, and today seems like the perfect day to share it with all of you." The room went dead silent. Even the children stopped making noise and turned to look at me. I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather portfolio that I always carried with me. Inside was my federal judicial identification, my Supreme Court nomination letter signed by President Biden, and the official ceremony invitation that had been hand-delivered to me by a Secret Service agent last week. But I didn't reveal those documents yet. Instead, I pulled out my regular business card and handed it to Uncle Roberto. He looked at the card and his face went pale. "Judge Isabella Rodriguez, United States Court of Appeals, Third Circuit," he read aloud in a shaky voice. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but I held up my hand for silence. "That's my old job title, Uncle Roberto. As of today, I'm getting a promotion." The confusion on their faces was priceless. Carmen was the first to recover from the shock. "Wait, you're a judge? Like a real judge? Why didn't you ever tell us?" The hurt in her voice was unmistakable, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic after the hour of abuse I had just endured. "Because every time I've tried to talk about my career over the past 12 years, this family has made it clear that you're not interested in listening," I replied calmly. "Every conversation turns into criticism about my personal life, my lack of a husband, my lack of children. So I stopped sharing. I stopped trying to include you in the most important parts of my life because you made it clear that nothing I accomplished would ever be good enough for you. My mother was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Isabella, honey, if you're really a federal judge, why did you let us? Why didn't you stop us from? She couldn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she was trying to say. Why had I let them humiliate me if I had the power to stop it? Because I wanted to see how far you would go, I said honestly. I wanted to understand exactly what this family thinks of me when you believe I can't defend myself. And now I know. When you thought I was powerless, you treated me like garbage. You chanted loser at me like I was some kind of enemy. You threatened to disown me. You accused me of being unemployed, of running scams, of being an embarrassment to the family name. The shame on their faces was starting to show, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out the second document from my portfolio, the official nomination letter from the White House. This is a letter from President Biden, nominating me to serve on the United States Supreme Court, I announced, holding up the document so everyone could see the official seal. The room exploded in gasps and shocked exclamations. Uncle Roberto grabbed the letter from my hands and read it out loud, his voice cracking with emotion. The President of the United States hereby nominates Judge Isabella Rodriguez to serve as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. He couldn't finish reading because his hands were shaking too badly. My teenage nephew Carlos, who had started the loser chant, was now looking at me like I was some kind of mythical creature. Are you serious right now? You're going to be on the Supreme Court? Like, the actual Supreme Court? The disbelief in his voice was understandable. 30 minutes ago, he had been leading a family chant calling me a total loser. Now he was discovering that the loser was about to become one of the 9 most powerful judges in America. I checked my watch, 3:52 p.m. 38 minutes until the ceremony. The confirmation hearing was held in closed session last week, I explained. The vote was unanimous. 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans all agreed that I was qualified to serve on the highest court in the land. The swearing-in ceremony begins in exactly 38 minutes, and Chief Justice Roberts will be administering my oath. Carmen was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the magnitude of her cruelty began to sink in. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If we had known. But I cut her off before she could finish her apology. If you had known what, Carmen? If you had known I was successful, you would have treated me with respect? If you had known I was powerful, you wouldn't have called me a loser? Don't you see how messed up that is? Your respect shouldn't be conditional on my job title or my achievements. I'm your sister. I've always been your sister. But you treated me like an enemy because you assumed I was beneath you. My mother was sobbing openly now, her hands covering her face in shame. Isabella, mi hija, please forgive us. We didn't know. We thought. We were worried about you. All the secrecy, all the traveling. We thought you were struggling, and we were trying to help you face reality. Her explanation made sense from her perspective, but it didn't excuse the cruelty. Mom, there's a difference between showing concern and showing cruelty, I replied gently but firmly. You could have pulled me aside and asked me privately if I was okay. Instead, you organized a family intervention designed to humiliate me. You let a 17-year-old boy lead a chant calling me a loser. You threatened to disown me. That wasn't love, Mom. That was abuse. Uncle Roberto was still holding the nomination letter, reading it over and over again like he couldn't believe it was real. Isabella, I need you to understand something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We had no idea. If we had known you were a federal judge, if we had known about any of this. He gestured helplessly at the documents in his hands. But that's exactly the problem, Uncle Roberto, I interrupted. Your treatment of me was based on assumptions. You assumed I was a failure, so you treated me like one. You never bothered to ask questions or show genuine interest in my life. You just decided I was a disappointment and acted accordingly. My phone buzzed again. Another call from the Supreme Court. This time it was Chief Justice Roberts himself. Justice Rodriguez, he said when I answered, and I could hear the pride in his voice as he used my new title for the first time. I wanted to personally confirm that you're still planning to arrive at 4:15 for the pre-ceremony briefing. The other justices are eager to welcome you to the court. Yes, Chief Justice Roberts, I replied, making sure my family could hear every word. I'm leaving Philadelphia in just a few minutes. I'll be there with time to spare. When I hung up, the room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. The reality of what was happening was finally sinking in for everyone. My cousin Miguel, who had called me a failure earlier, was now looking at me with something approaching awe. Isabella, when you say you're leaving for the ceremony, do you mean like right now? Today? You're going to be sworn in today. The urgency in his voice made it clear that he was beginning to understand the historical significance of what was happening. The ceremony begins at 4:30, I confirmed, checking my watch one more time. I need to leave in the next few minutes to make it to Washington on time. The Secret Service is probably already wondering where I am. That wasn't entirely true. My security detail was waiting outside in an unmarked car, but I wanted my family to understand the level of protection and importance associated with my position. Carmen was still crying, but now she was angry too. Why didn't you tell us, Isabella? Why did you let us make fools of ourselves? Why did you let us say all those horrible things when you knew you could have stopped it at any time? Her questions were fair, but I had my reasons for letting the confrontation play out. Because I needed to know, I said simply. I needed to know how this family really feels about me when you think I can't fight back. I needed to understand whether your love is conditional on my success. And now I have my answer. When you thought I was weak, you attacked me. When you thought I was unsuccessful, you mocked me. When you thought I was defenseless, you humiliated me. The truth of my words hung in the air like a heavy fog. No one could deny what had happened in the past hour. No one could pretend that their behavior had been acceptable. They had revealed their true character, and now they had to live with the consequences. My father, who had been mostly quiet during the entire confrontation, finally stood up from his chair. Isabella, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice heavy with shame. We all owe you an apology. But more than that, we owe you our respect. What you've accomplished, becoming a Supreme Court justice, it's incredible. We should be celebrating you, not tearing you down. I appreciated his words, but they felt too little, too late. Dad, the time for apologies was before you let your family spend an hour calling me a loser. The time for respect was when I walked through that door as your daughter, regardless of what job I have or how much money I make. You can't take back what happened here today. My watch showed 4:02 p.m. I needed to leave immediately if I was going to make it to the ceremony on time. I gathered my documents and put them back in my portfolio, then looked around the room at my family one last time. I have to go now, I announced. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court is waiting for me. As I turned to leave, my nephew Carlos called out to me. Aunt Isabella, wait. I turned back to look at him, and I could see genuine remorse in his 17-year-old eyes. I'm really sorry about the chanting thing. I don't know why I did that. It was really messed up. His apology seemed sincere, and I appreciated that he was taking responsibility for his actions. Carlos, you're young, and you were following the lead of the adults in this room, I said gently. But I hope you learned something from today. I hope you learned that you should never judge someone based on assumptions. And I hope you remember that words have power. They can hurt people in ways that last forever. As I walked toward the door, my mother called out one last time. Isabella, will you call us? After the ceremony? We want to be part of your life. We want to celebrate with you. Her request was heartbreaking because I could hear the desperation in her voice. She was realizing that she might have permanently damaged our relationship. I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. Mom, I'll think about it. But you need to understand that our relationship can never go back to the way it was before today. You've shown me who you really are when you think I'm powerless. I can't unsee that. I can't unhear the things you said. We'll see what the future holds. With that, I walked out of my childhood home for what might be the last time. As I stepped onto the front porch, I could see the unmarked Secret Service car waiting for me at the curb. Agent Thompson, who had been assigned as my security detail, got out of the car and opened the back door for me. Good afternoon, Justice Rodriguez, he said with a respectful nod. We were starting to worry about you. Traffic is light, so we should make it to the court with time to spare. I thanked him and settled into the back seat, finally allowing myself to process everything that had just happened. As we drove away from my family's house, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had revealed themselves to be cruel and judgmental. Relief because I no longer had to pretend that our relationship was healthy or functional. The truth was finally out in the open. 37 minutes later, I was standing in the East Conference Room of the Supreme Court building, surrounded by 8 of the most brilliant legal minds in America. Chief Justice Roberts was holding the oath of office, and Justice Thomas was serving as my witness. The ceremony was being broadcast live on C-SPAN, and I knew that somewhere in Philadelphia, my family was watching their total loser being sworn in as the youngest Supreme Court justice in American history. As I raised my right hand and began to recite the oath, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 12 years of serving as a federal judge, 2 years at Harvard Law School, 4 years of undergraduate study at Yale, and countless hours of studying, writing, and fighting for justice. None of it had been easy, but all of it had led to this incredible honor. I, Isabella Rodriguez, do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States under the Constitution and laws of the United States. So help me God. When the ceremony concluded, Chief Justice Roberts shook my hand and welcomed me to the court with genuine warmth. Justice Rodriguez, it's an honor to have you join us. Your judicial record speaks for itself, and I know you'll be a valuable addition to our court. The other justices lined up to congratulate me, and I was struck by the respect and professionalism they showed me. Later that evening, as I sat in my new chambers reviewing my first case files, I reflected on the contrast between my family's treatment and my colleagues' reception. The 9 people who knew me best professionally had welcomed me with open arms and genuine respect. The 23 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had called me a loser and threatened to disown me. My phone started ringing around 8 p.m. Carmen was calling, probably to congratulate me and apologize again. Then Uncle Roberto called. Then my mother. Then Carlos. One by one, every family member who had participated in the afternoon's humiliation was trying to reach me. I let every call go to voicemail. The next morning, I woke up to find that my swearing-in ceremony had made national news. Youngest Supreme Court Justice in history sworn in was the headline on CNN. Breaking Barriers, Isabella Rodriguez makes history was the headline on NBC. From Philadelphia to the Supreme Court, Justice Rodriguez's remarkable journey was the headline in the Washington Post. My phone had 47 missed calls, 23 of them from family members. There were hundreds of text messages, dozens of voicemails, and more than 1,000 social media notifications. The whole world wanted to celebrate my achievement, but the people whose opinions had mattered most to me for 34 years had spent my moment of triumph calling me a failure. 3 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. In it, she apologized for the family's behavior and begged me to forgive them. She explained that they had organized a watch party for my swearing-in ceremony and that everyone had cried when they saw me taking the oath. She said they were proud of me and wanted to make things right. I appreciated the letter, but I wasn't ready to forgive. The wounds were still too fresh and the betrayal was still too painful. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be on different terms. I would never again allow them to treat me as less than I was worth. As I write this story today, 6 months after my confirmation, I can say that becoming a Supreme Court justice has been the greatest professional honor of my life. But the personal cost has been significant. I've learned that success can't heal family wounds, and achievements can't replace genuine love and support. My family's cruelty on that Thanksgiving Day taught me an important lesson about conditional love. When people only respect you because of your title or your accomplishments, that respect is fragile and meaningless. True love accepts you as you are, not as what you achieve. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you most are the least capable of providing that kind of acceptance. Today, as I sit in my Supreme Court chambers making decisions that will affect millions of Americans, I think about that afternoon when my family called me a total loser. I think about how wrong they were and how right I was to trust in my own worth, regardless of their opinions. I think about how their moment of cruelty became my moment of triumph, and how their shame became my strength. The Supreme Court was indeed waiting for me that day, just as the title of this story suggests. But more importantly, I was ready for the Supreme Court. I was ready to serve my country with honor and dignity, regardless of whether my family supported me or not. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who motivate you most. Sometimes the cruelest moments in your life lead to the greatest victories. And sometimes being called a total loser by your family is exactly the push you need to prove that you're actually a total winner. This is my story of revenge, redemption, and the ultimate vindication. This is the story of how I went from being my family's greatest disappointment to becoming one of the most powerful judges in America. And this is why you should never let anyone convince you that you're less than you know yourself to be.